Okay, so with that, knowing that the Gospels were written in a certain generation, we can also ask ourselves of what genre are these texts? What type of texts are they? The word gospel means good news. This means that this is a positive message about a certain person, a certain figure. Some scholars, at least one major scholar, has determined in his doctoral dissertation that the Gospels fit the genre of ancient biography. Some scholars have challenged this view broadly, but I still think despite its minor problems, that's the best framework that we can use to place these texts. And what some of these scholars who propose this view is that the Gospels are similar to the Greek text, the Greek bios, life. It's where we get, bio, life. You're telling a story of someone's life. These texts are meant to persuade people to the Christian cause. Ancient biography was not objective. They didn't claim to be objective. They were subjective. And they were meant to highlight a certain individual and then demonstrate a certain argument about that individual's career or life. Because they reflect ancient biography, they were blatantly subjective. And they typically stylized the main character in a stereotype that people would understand. So when somebody's reading these ancient biography, they would immediately place this person into a stereotype like a politician, a philosopher, or a miracle worker, or a Jewish holy man, or a prophet, or a Messiah. So in ancient biography, the writer is not concerned about the central figure's motives and also psychological development. The Gospels don't care about how Jesus is thinking through issues and how he's being sensitive about some issues and responding, and how his life sort of grows in a sort of crescendo. It's just simply static stories that we get about Jesus. In this explanation, we should note that every story or parable in the Gospels was strategically placed to support an overarching argument about Jesus. Here's an example in John 20 where he actually says this very thing. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these, the things that I put in there, are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. So even here, the author of John is stating specifically, I haven't put everything in. I carefully chose. And like in the Gospel of John, you get water turned to wine, which is a very messianic act, which we'll talk about in a future episode. You get, in fact, the entire second year of Jesus' ministry, there's a long stretch where in the Gospel of John, he includes one story. And that is, it's like in Jerusalem, one miracle story where Jesus goes to the pools of Bethesda and tells the guy to get up and carry his bed and walk. That's the only story in the entire year of Jesus' ministry. So we have to ask, what is that one story? Why is that placed there? And what does it tell us about the goal of showing that Jesus is the Messiah? So what period of Jesus' life occupies the largest amount of material in the Gospels? I ask my students this because the answer explains further that these texts were constructed for a specific subjective reason. Okay, it's not just to report history. They're not just trying to report historical facts as we're used to today. So I asked this question, what period of Jesus' ministry took the largest amount of the Gospels? The answer is, it's the last 2 weeks of his life. And I'll show you up here on the screen for those of you who are getting this through the YouTube channel, is that here in the Gospel of Mark is at 16 chapters, but notice that in chapter 8, so we're only halfway through the Gospel, we're already at Caesarea Philippi, which is one of the last discussions that Jesus has with his disciples. And in the very next chapter, Mark 9, is Jesus' transfiguration. And then in Mark 10, Jesus leaves for Jerusalem. So we're really about 2 or 3 weeks away from Jesus' death, the last 3 weeks, a month maximum of his life. Yet that is about 50% of the gospel. The Gospel of Matthew is 28 chapters. In Matthew 16 is where you get to Caesarea Philippi. Matthew 27 is the transfiguration. In Matthew 19, Jesus leaves for Jerusalem. So here we get about 40%. This is not scientific. I didn't go count every verse, but get a sense of how much they are devoting to the last few weeks of Jesus' life. In the Gospel of Luke, this is 24 chapters. And in Luke 9, you're already getting to Caesarea Philippi. Also in Luke 9, the transfiguration. And then a few chapters later, in Luke 13, is when Jesus leaves for Jerusalem for the last time. So this is about 2/3 of the gospel, at least if you're looking at it in the timeline. 2/3 of the gospels are within the last few weeks of his life. Although those chapters from chapter 9 on do contain a lot of parables, a lot of stuff in there that could have been given earlier in his ministry, and that they were just stuck in those chapters. Also, the Gospel of John, 21 chapters, but early in John 6, Jesus is already at Caesarea Philippi with his disciples. John 10, he leaves for Jerusalem. So here we get about 50 to 70% of the gospel that is within the last few weeks of Jesus' life. Again, what this tells us is that these gospels aren't trying to write a biography of Jesus like we're used to today, where they talk about Jesus's childhood and birth and his ancestry and going through and really showing everything about his life. They're just getting these sort of Cliff Notes version of his life, carefully crafted stories placed strategically to make a point, a strong point for the readers of these texts, or at least what the authors are trying to, the audience.